Hello, everyone. Thank you, John, for that incredibly lovely introduction, and hearing my resume said out loud. It's like kind of weird, but great. So thank you for that. Sorry about this. All right. So it really is an unexpected yet lovely honor to be with you all today. And I'm actually quite honored and humbled. I spend most of my time trying to avoid the spotlight, so this is mildly uncomfortable. So I'm going to warn you with 2 spoilers for my talk today. First, there will be a plot twist, and I'm going to flip the script, and you'll see that this moment is really not about me. And second, as per the official rules of a keynote, there will be a happy ending, but more on that later. Now, I feel fortunate, as John shared, that throughout my career, I've had the luxury of being PBL adjacent. And as an educator, I saw the power of PBL as a way to bring course content to life for my students. As a researcher, I did work to understand the equity-related challenges of scaling PBL. And as an assessment person and professional learning provider, I worked to link performance assessment with PBL, and I really saw how one could make the case for the other. And then, as noted, as a program officer at a charitable foundation, I invested in school networks that were building capacity to do PBL, supported research to understand the positive impact of PBL on student growth, and funded a research practice partnership, as noted, organized by PBL Works to explore how to scale PBL. And now as a designer at the D School, I have a chance to bring together the work from all those points of view, educating, researching, assessing, training, supporting, and apply them to PBL and other important ideas in education to think through how we can make the size of those solutions match the size of the problems we face, and to do so through the lens of social justice. I know over the past couple of days, you've had a chance to learn from Chris Emden and Zaretta Hammond, 2 scholars I admire, and whose wisdom about education and equity needs to be shared far and wide. So what I hope to do with my few minutes with you all today is to engage you in thinking about how you might help do that, how to pull together Chris's and Zaretta's keen insights about the things you're learning at PBL World, along with your own lived experience, and design your story about the work you are doing. But let me start by telling a story. I did join the D School K-12 lab in mid-February of this year, and I was excited to have a chance to develop prototypes around scaled impact in the social sector. And it was just weeks into my tenure in early March when extra bottles of Purell started to show up around the building and staff were assigned to start cleaning doorknobs. And then a few weeks after that, this is mid-March now, we're all sitting at our kitchen tables learning how to use virtual backgrounds on yet another Zoom meeting. And as everyone in this virtual room knows, schools are shut down with 9 out of 10 students worldwide out of school. And it was hard to make sense of what was happening in the world, and even harder to consider the ways the pandemic was differentially impacting students furthest from opportunity. Now, I no longer have my foundation checkbook to help support nonprofits doing the important work responding to these needs, and no longer had easy access to policymakers to lift up exemplars of what's possible. But what I did have was a connection to a larger community of folks through the D School who wanted to learn together and who were willing to help others to build empathy during this crisis. So in mid-April, I reached out to my friend and colleague, Jessica, who's a performing arts program officer, whose office was 2 doors down from mine at the Hewlett Foundation. And we agreed that we want to run a workshop, an online version of a workshop that we had previously done in person. And this would help first-time writers learn how to create a play in a day and focus on telling stories we needed to hear during this time of the COVID-19 pandemic and school closures. And so this was my chance to draw key lessons from everything I've learned about PBL throughout my career: how to make work authentic, how to have a chance for reflection, to provide voice and choice, to provide opportunities for critique and revision, and to have a public product. And with how I could be of service in this moment and to help use the power of stories. So for this project, I ran a creative stroll for a month. It's a much slower version of a sprint that we might see, leading up to the workshop, where participants stretched their creative muscles and also thought about power and privilege and their identity in this world. And then in late May, we ran the workshop with about 50 students, teachers, parents, and community members from literally around the world participating. And over 24 hours, they all worked together virtually in teams, and every single one of those teams created a play. And the stories that they told in their plays. There was one about homeless LGBTQ youth who needed to return home during the pandemic. A story about student allyship in response to anti-Asian racism. About challenges whole families were facing as they needed to share one laptop. about a non-binary identifying youth finding online resources, and parents of a student with autism fighting to find learning resources. These are stories that needed to be told at this moment. And then we hired professional actors to help coach the teams and then to perform the plays. And so after the plays were done, we rehearsed them with the actors, ran a complete dress rehearsal in the afternoon, and at 4 p.m. Pacific time, we gave the actors a dinner break so they could go relax and get ready for the show, and asked them to be back online at 4:45 before our show started at 5. And we were getting really excited. I mean, there were writers from India who had stayed up all night just to participate in this workshop. There was a 12-year-old student who had asked his mother for permission to participate in the workshop. And we knew that writers had their families sitting online at their laptops waiting for opening and closing night of their plays. And folks were gathered together, seeing how these actors would turn words on a stage into living characters on a virtual stage. And so the work for the entire month had been building up to this moment. The exhibition was about to begin. And then at 4:50, I received the following text from one of the actors, and she was based in LA. Okay, let's just pause before I finish this story. Now, some of you might be familiar with a classic dramatic structure for storytelling. Now, remember when I say I like to stay out of the spotlight? This is how we're going to do it. I'm going to ask you to get a piece of paper or open up a new doc on your laptop. And go ahead, I'll wait. What I'm going to do is I'm going to invite you to write your own keynote address to tell your story. I'm going to use my keynote to help you write your keynote. Now, in the storytelling structure, that's pretty much part of any play, you start with the exposition about the humdrum life that someone leads, the protagonist leads, before the story begins. And so that was like me just getting started at D school. And then there's an inciting incident that's a disturbance in the status quo, and what thrusts the protagonist into the story and sets things in motion. And that's like Dorothy and the tornado or the global pandemic that launched me into doing a project. So I want you to think about your story. What's the exposition? How would you describe what your life was like before you were introduced to PBL? And you can feel free to make it black and white or all sepia toned. And then think about what was the inciting incident for you? Was there a teacher who used projects who inspired you? Were there students who you felt were not getting the same opportunities as their more affluent peers? Or maybe it was when you came to PBL World and saw what's possible. So think about what is that moment that you would share about what activated you and got you interested in this work? Next is rising action, where you must choose a course of action and face challenges that test you along the way. So Dorothy killed the Wicked Witch of the East and set off down the Yellow Brick Road and learned she had to retrieve the broomstick of the Wicked Witch of the West to see the wizard. Now for me, it was when we threw open the invitation to the workshop and I started day one of the 28-day creative stroll, and there was no turning back for me. And then I spent a month trying to figure out how to run a collaborative workshop over Zoom and have actors perform with each other through technology. So for you, what is the rising action in your story? And then next we reach a climax, where the protagonist needs to overcome their fears and their past, and use everything they've learned over the course of the story for some final challenge. In a well-constructed story that can be suspenseful, things can really go either way. The outcome can either lead to a happy ending or to a tragic ending. So for Dorothy, it was a showdown with the witch. In my story, it was actors I care for deeply who were now facing the reality of police and tear gas and rubber bullets flying outside their front doors. So yes, this was the day when the George Floyd protests and uprising had reached their first fevered pitch. And it was a reminder that the projects we take on are never fully isolated from the real world. So for you, what is that moment of climax? What's the turning point around PBL or social justice and education that determines your fate? Now, whether you face success or failure with the climax, we then turn to the falling action. That's the aftermath of what just happened in the climax. And here's where we move towards the resolution or the start of a new state of normal, a new equilibrium. Now, in the story, the protagonist is not the same at the end as who they were at the beginning. So Dorothy now realizes there's no place like home, and she knows that she always had within her what she needed. So what's your falling action? And how are you a different person because of how you succeeded or failed with regard to PBL and what you have or have not been able to do? How do your students now know more than they ever dreamed they could know, or can rethink their place in education? Or how have you worked to dismantle just one more piece of the structure that maintains inequities and racism and oppression in our system? Now for me, the falling action of my story, that night, and that actor sent us that text, we decided the show could not go on. The safety of our friends had to take precedence over what was happening with our project. So Jessica and I went online and apologized. We told everyone that we were canceling the evening show. And this project did not turn out how I had hoped. And in the moment, I faced a tragic ending and felt I had let down so many people who had given their time and energy and creative goodwill to this project. It was a difficult choice to make, but it was the right choice to make. And I felt that this was what we need to do to move forward. And I thought to myself, that's how I was changed from this experience. Then a teacher from San Diego shared the following WhatsApp exchange with me that had been with the rest of her team. Happened to be this teacher, another teacher from Mexico, and an 8th grader from San Francisco. So I told you there's going to be a plot twist. I was going to flip the script. See, I learned that this story wasn't actually about me at all. All along, it was actually about these educators and the student who, through this project, saw the power of storytelling and now knew that their voices needed to be heard. So they jumped in, they faced a point of no return in writing a play and strode headfirst towards the challenge felt around the world with police brutality and racism. And our heroes for applying everything they learned. And they are changed, because they now see that art is a precursor to systemic change. It allows us to hold up a mirror to see our world and to imagine a different future for all of us. A good project can change the world and, more importantly, change a life. And a good story is how we help others feel that too. And so that's what I hope to leave with you today. Go forth, do amazing projects, and tell your story. And as your students take on projects, listen closely to their stories, because this is your moment to be their PBL champion. See, I told you, I promised you a happy ending. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your conference.